Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Hannah Wood. I'm a principal lecturer in built environment at the University of Brighton. So I teach on all of our construction related courses. This presentation is just going to give you a bit of an overview of what a lecture is like. It will be very brief, but it will hopefully give you an introduction into lectures at the University of Brighton. So the topic I'm going to cover in this video is digital construction. So looking at new technologies within the construction industry, how they're changing the industry, how they're improving the industry, and what's going to happen in the future. So the contents of the lecture are going to be, we'll very briefly look at some traditional versus modern methods, give you a little bit of context and background about the construction industry, what's important, where things go wrong, for example. And then we'll move on to looking at some of the new technologies or the emerging technologies that are being used in industry. And there's a whole variety of these. We'll look very briefly at things like augmented and virtual reality, 3D printing, drones, etc. But there's a whole lot more that obviously can't be covered in a 20-minute presentation. But this is just an introduction. So we start off by thinking about what the construction industry is, what's important to the construction industry, and then moving on to how can we improve it through the use of technology and what impact does technology have. So if we think first about the kind of things that are important within the construction industry, there are a whole host of things that we have to consider when we're planning or designing projects. But these are just a few to kind of give you a bit of an overview. The first one I'll mention is the most important, and that is safety. So we always consider health and safety to be the primary concern on any project, whether you're a designer, a quantity surveyor, a building surveyor, a construction manager, whatever it might be, whatever your role is within the construction industry, safety is always our paramount concern. Other things that we have to also consider, though, are things like financing projects. So making sure we're working to budgets, making sure that the client actually has the finance behind them for the project, and also thinking about ways in which we can make construction more efficient and more effective for contractors or designers to make sure that they are able to make a living as well. Another area that's very, very important in construction is quality. So looking at the quality of the completed design and the completed construction work, making sure we have effective quality assurance methods in place to make sure, that we can keep a record of everything and make sure it's all updated as we go and the client has the correct information when we hand a project over. Design is obviously also extremely important. So having a design that's right for the client or for the project, whatever that might be. Making sure, again, as I said earlier, that the health and safety of both the construction workers but also the users of the building are included in the design. And making sure, again, that it's a design that represents the client, so that the aesthetics of the building, how it looks, are actually what's needed and they're going to fit into the local area and that kind of thing. So design is very, very important within any construction project. Meeting the brief is also something we consider an awful lot. Any sort of management role within construction, whether it be client-facing or working for one of the subcontractors, the contractor, the designer, we always have to think about how can we meet the client's needs and make sure that we understand exactly what the client needs. Innovation is another area that is very important to think about. How can we push the construction industry forward? And that's one of the things that new technology can help us with. Sustainability is another area that is very high on our list of priorities. So whether that be through the design, making sure that the building is energy efficient, for example, making use of renewable energies, or through the construction process, minimising waste, minimising pollution, and also thinking about the future of whatever it is we're building. So could it be used for something else? Is it adaptable? Heritage is another area that we're very keen on. So actually preserving current buildings, whether that be a 1930s semi-detached house or a huge Gothic cathedral, whatever it may be, it will need maintenance and construction work. And a lot of the construction work that happens across the world is actually on existing property rather than new build. Finally, reputation is very, very important. So looking at things like the Considerate Constructors scheme, where contractors make a effort to minimise their impact on the local community, but also to provide help to the local community if they can. So those are all the areas that we kind of try to keep in mind with all the projects that are undertaken. Moving on to kind of how it progresses with the technology, we have to think about traditional methods versus the new technology and how these are changing. So brick walls, you can see there, are a very traditional method. Stonework, obviously previous to that, but brick and block are very, very common construction techniques within the UK especially. When we talk about all the different technologies and different materials, we're not saying that these types of traditional methods are obsolete and we'll be getting rid of them and, you know, nobody's ever going to build in that method again. Actually, these are tried and tested methods, and generally they will continue. So the use of these types of materials, the use of concrete and steel work are, you know, here to stay really. What we can do is look at ways that we can make those materials more sustainable, so making them reusable, for example, or using waste materials within there. And technology can also help us with making the processes more efficient, making sure there's less waste, those kind of things. So whilst traditional methods are still used, we're always looking for ways that we might be able to improve upon them. Just thinking about sort of history of construction and the types of construction now. When we come through to talk about the different technologies in a few moments, think about how they might have been applied within some projects like these. So you've probably seen some of these buildings before. You might have seen the Shard in person. If you've been there, you may have seen some of these other ones, but you'll probably be aware of them. These are all high-tech skyscraper buildings which utilise lots of different modern construction methods. Now, whilst skyscraper construction isn't anything new, if you think back to things like the Empire State Building, for example, the difference now is that these are built more quickly, but they're also built much, much more safely. So whilst we could build skyscraper type buildings in the past, they were never done to the sort of safety standards that we have now. So there would be deaths and injuries on those types of projects. So that's kind of how, in a lot of ways, technology allows us to push the barriers of what we can build, but also allows us to do it in a safe way. So how can technology help? there are lots of ways that technology can help push the industry forward. One is through better integration and management. So management of the project is of key importance. You have to make sure that everyone knows what they're doing, that all the different parties are at the same stage, that they are using the same drawings, for example. If something gets updated on an architect's plan, it also needs to be updated on an engineer's plan, for example. So there are lots of ways that when everything was done separately, so paper-based drawings and just basic 2D CAD drawings that are all owned by different project parties, there was there can be lots of issues with, one thing being updated and not another. So that's something that the new technologies can really help with. They can integrate by using specialist softwares and make sure that everyone has access and everyone's working on the same model of the building. Using new technologies, it helps us to increase the quality. And as I said earlier, that's a key aspect of any construction project, and also push innovation. So as I said, some of those skyscrapers that we were looking at wouldn't have been possible 10, 15, 20 years ago. Increased safety and well-being, very, very important. There are lots of ways that technology can help with that. And when we get to the certain technologies, I'll discuss that. And also, using technology can often make the process quicker, it can make it more efficient, and therefore can give us the potential within the industry to make greater profits. So looking at some new and emerging technologies, this is just going to, as I said, very briefly go through the few technologies that I talked about, and I'll give you a list of other ones to look at the end if you are interested in looking at that further. So we'll start off looking at augmented and virtual reality. We're also going to look at 3D laser scanning, robotics, modern methods of construction and 3D printing, drone use, and wearable technology. So 3D laser scanning. Basically, 3D laser scanning is a type of surveying method. So surveying is all about taking measurements so that we can produce plans or maps, which can then be used by designers to produce a design for the project, and then can be set out on site and actually established in the correct place. The bonus of using 3D laser scans is that they're much, much more accurate than doing this manually, and they're also much quicker. So although it's expensive equipment to start with, it can really increase the speed of these works. You can use them for monitoring progress on site, and also monitoring things like movement of existing structures. So if you think about projects like Crossrail, for example, which you're probably all aware of, when they were drilling through for the tunnelling, they were very, very close to existing lines and existing buildings, and therefore they had to monitor everything that was happening with those buildings to make sure there wasn't any undue movement of those structures. And 3D scanning is a good way of doing that. One benefit of it is that you can feed it directly into those building information models that I was talking about earlier, and it can also link in with augmented and virtual reality. So the video showed you a point cloud, a fly through of a point cloud. The point cloud is the type of file that we produce after doing a 3D scan. And basically the different colours represent the different intensity of the information that the laser hits. Every single one of these tiny little points that makes up these images has data attached to it, which tells us exactly where that point is located within either the site, or it can also be tied into GPS and the national grid. So it's lots and lots of information. It can be used to great effect. And as I said, it's much quicker than traditional methods. Again, it doesn't mean it will replace traditional methods because it can't be used for certain areas, but for the kind of monitoring, the initial site surveys. It's a brilliant tool. Moving on to virtual and augmented reality. Some of you may have had a go with some virtual reality glasses. You might have a headset that attaches to things like your PlayStation or your mobile phone, which allow you to play games and that kind of thing, watch movies. The way we use it within construction is mainly for things like training. So training operatives on different site dangers, for example, can be a good way. Working at height, they can get the understanding of how it feels to be in that situation, but in a safe environment virtually. We also use it for allowing clients, for example, to understand how their building's going to look, and they'll be able to walk through the design, feel the different spaces, understand the flow of the building. And augmented reality is also used. So virtual reality, you are fully immersed in a virtual world, whereas augmented reality overlays some data into the real world. So things like Google Glass, so that you can use, allow you to see what's happening around you, but can, for example, project what a design might look within that site. So you can get an understanding of how the design or the project will actually sit within the site. So we're using this more and more within construction, and again, it's a growing area. Lots of work is being done on things like virtual meetings now. So instead of everyone coming to the site or going to the architect's design office to discuss the project, they can all dial in using the virtual reality software, and they can all meet in the actual designed building and see their way around the building. So there are lots of ways that it can be used, which are going to change the way that we work. Drones, again, like VR, this is probably something you have all seen. Or some of you may have a little drone, you may have flown drones around. They can be used, again, to great effect within construction. There are lots of different ways. One way is to monitor the progress of work on large sites. So if you have these mega projects which are difficult to get around, drones can be used to remotely monitor what's happening. This video here shows some work that one of our students did a couple of years ago, looking at how drones could be used to inspect hard to reach areas of buildings. So this is a building in Brighton. If you're familiar with Brighton, it's called St Bart's. It's a very, very high ceilinged church, and to be able to inspect the ceiling and the higher aspects of the walls, it's very, very costly and difficult to get in scaffolding, for example. So the use of a drone can at least allow you to see if you need to get that scaffolding in, if there is anything that needs repair. Other things that drones can be used for are surveying purposes. So again, you can attach a 3D laser scanner to a drone, which allows you to take some different scans. So there's all sorts of different ways that you can do that. And as I said, one of the main benefits of them is that it allows you to access dangerous locations. So things like where the ground is unstable or contaminated land, if you need to be able to visually inspect, then a drone is great for that. Moving on to modern methods of construction and 3D printing. Modern methods of construction are basically things like off-site manufacture, prefabrication, panelized or modularized buildings. So you will probably be aware that this is becoming more significant within industry. There's a big push for this in terms of off-site manufacturing reduces waste. It also improves quality. So the actual parts of the building are built in a factory, delivered to site and installed. And there's lots of different ways it can happen. You can have self-contained units like this one down the bottom here, which all sort of plug together, and lots of hotels, student accommodation, those kind of projects which are very repetitive, utilize these types of methods. There's also things like self-contained pod units, which are very often used for bathrooms. So these are fully finished and delivered to site with all the fixings in place, and they literally plug into the services and they are up and running and ready to go. So again, it maintains quality, it speeds up the process, and there's also a safety aspect because working in a factory is much more predictable than working in a construction site. Also, things that are now progressing with modern methods of construction are 3D printing of buildings. So whilst many of you may have seen a 3D printer working and you can see how you can make small components and parts of buildings, we're actually investigating now ways in which 3D printers on a very large scale can be used to manufacture buildings. So this gives you an example here of a 3D printed house. These can be produced in about 24 hours, just the structure. So basically the 3D printing rig is a huge rig which is pumping out a specialist type of concrete, which you can see down here in the bottom picture, where it's printing out the walls and then the structure inside. Obviously, you would still have all the finishings and all the services to install, but you can see how something like this in 24 hours and then the rig is moved and another one is built could be really helpful for things like addressing the shortage of housing that we have. Wearable technology is another area that is quite fast growing within construction. And again, lots of you probably have either got or seen things like Fitbits and smartwatches. That's a type of wearable technology that can track things like your heart rate and where you are physically, GPS sensors, which can be very useful on a construction site just to make sure that people are all okay and they're not in places where they shouldn't be, so they're not straying into dangerous working areas where they shouldn't be working. So that's one way they can be used, and they can either be built into something like a smartwatch or into something like this high-vis vest, which has got all sorts of different sensors in it. It can also inflate partially when it detects something like a fall that help protect you. There are all sorts of different types of sensors that we can use. Also, something that's becoming very useful for health and safety are proximity sensors. So if you can see the top picture here in the top corner, you can see this orange unit on the back of the hard hat. This is something that will alert the wearer to the proximity of large vehicles. A lot of times on construction sites, you'll be wearing ear defenders because there's noisy works going on, especially in works such as road works, so building new roads or extending roads, that kind of project. You don't always hear these big vehicles coming because you've got a lot of other noise going on around you. So the idea of these proximity sensors is that you can be working. If a vehicle gets close to you, it's coming past you or working near you, the unit will vibrate and allow you to know that there's something there and not to suddenly step back, for example. And it means that you can get to a safe working distance if need be. Exoskeletons, if I just go back to the previous slide, are also something that's being developed more and more now. And these are things that can help manual labour. For example, they can help with heavy work, lifting, repetitive tasks. They can take a lot of the strain away from the individual's muscles and joints by using these wearable exoskeletons. So they're augmenting the human body. Finally, just to very quickly go over robotics. So robots are being used more and more in construction, and they're one of the most promising aspects. There's a lot of work going on looking at how robots can be used, but they're starting to be used in areas such as physical construction, so bricklaying, steel reinforcement, fitting, those kind of things, but also utilising some of those other technologies for monitoring, identifying discrepancies between work that's been designed and actually built on site, and of course in the off-site manufacture of components. So, as I said earlier, there's lots more things that you can explore in this area. These are a few of them. Things like BIM, sustainable materials and methods, artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles, the Internet of Things. All of these have a future in construction and make it a really exciting industry to work in. Hope that was helpful and gave you a little idea of what a lecture might be like. Thank you very much for listening.